You'll use many tools as a well-rounded integration services developer. There are several I'm going to discuss now that are the most important tools that you'll use as you develop, execute, and deploy your integration services packages. The first one is the Import and Export Wizard. This is the entry point for quickly building a package. You can use it to create basic packages, even if you intend to further refine a package to move data to and from OLEDB or flat file data sources. While you're learning integration services, this tool is a great way to learn about its basic features. Then there's SQL Server Data Tools, or sometimes abbreviated SSDT. This is Microsoft's premier integrated development environment for integration services packages, providing a full set of graphical tools for collaborative design, testing, and deployment. It's based on the interface of Visual Studio with additional templates for integration services, and it allows you to design integration services packages side by side with other SQL Server BI components, such as analysis services and reporting services solutions. If you're a developer familiar with Visual Studio, you'll feel right at home using data tools. You should be aware that SQL Server Data Tools is the successor to the Business Intelligent Development Studio, or BIDS, in earlier versions of integration services. Data Tools is similar to BIDS in that they're both extensions to Visual Studio for developing database objects and BI solutions. But Data Tools is a nearly complete overhaul of BIDS. Data Tools is an optional installation feature when you install SQL Server, and itself is a limited version of Visual Studio 2012. And you'll need the BI extensions to them to get the project templates for creating BI projects, including integration services. But if you first install the full version of Visual Studio 2012, when you start Data Tools, you'll actually use the full version of Visual Studio. In that case, you'll have the full functionality of the rich development environment at your fingertips. All right, then another tool that you use often is SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS. This is the tool that database administrators and developers use for managing SQL Server instances and objects. Hopefully you're well familiar with it. It provides an entry point to the Import and Export Wizard, as well as tools for managing and executing packages that are stored within the SQL Server instance. And then, somewhat surprisingly, Notepad, or any other text editor of your choice. This is sometimes useful for editing packages. Integration services packages are stored in a regular XML file with the DTSX file extension. You can use Notepad to inspect and make minor changes to a package file. Now, you should generally use data tools to create and modify packages because it automates many tasks, and it saves you the chore of writing complex XML, as well as protecting the integrity of that resulting XML. But a text editor remains a fallback if you need to edit a package and the integration services tools are not available, or if you need to make global changes, such as with hard-coded paths. But frankly, even if I need to access the package as the XML text file, I usually just use SQL Server Data Tools. Visual Studio has XML text editors built in that color code and do all kinds of nice things for you. So Notepad's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but whatever text editor that you want to use is going to be fine. They're just text files. All right, so with that, let's start talking about creating a package with the Import and Export Wizard. This is a handy tool for creating a basic package to move data from one place to another, as I mentioned. It automates a lot of the process, and you can opt to save the package for later tweaking and enhancements, or run it immediately and then throw it away, or both if you want to. The package generated by the wizard doesn't take advantage of any of integration services transformation features or other cool features, nor does it use what are really considered to be best practices for packages. But it can't be beat when you need to move data from one place to another as a once-off kind of operation. What I'm going to do now is use the Import and Export Wizard to build a simple integration services package to extract rows from a table in the AdventureWorks 2012 database, and I'll write them out to a text file. The wizard is going to walk us through the three main steps in setting up a package: define a data source, perform a basic column mapping transformation, and choose a data destination. And then I'll also choose to store the integration services package as a file system file for editing later on. All right, so the first thing I need to do is launch the import and export wizard. Now, how you do this, of course, depends upon the version of Windows that you're using. I'm still using Windows 7 here, so I'm just going to come down here, click on the Windows button there, and type in import and export data. And as you can see, there's a couple of different versions installed, one for 32-bit and one for 64-bit. Now, alternatively, I can hit the Escape key and come down here into All Programs, go into SQL Server 2012, same thing works for 2014, and there you can see the two versions of the import and export data wizard. Okay, so this is a 64-bit version of Windows. I have a 64-bit version of SQL Server installed, so I'm going to use that instance. All right, so there's the welcome page. You can read that, and as usual, you can opt to not show that starting page again. So I'll move on past that. And the first real page that we come to is Choose a Data Source. This is where you specify the source of the data. So in this case, I'm going to choose the options or set the options to connect to a local instance of SQL Server where I have AdventureWorks 2012 installed. So I'm going to use the SQL Server native client. I'm going to go against the local server name, but if I needed to access a remote database, I could do that by putting in the appropriate address. And in this case, I'm going to use Windows Authentication. I'm logged into this version of Windows as a system administrator, and I also have permissions within SQL Server, so that's going to get me access to all of the data there. But obviously, if you need to enter any other kind of SQL Server authentication information, you can select that and enter it. All right, so now I'm going to move to the AdventureWorks 2012 database. And there you go. So I can click on Next because we've configured our data source. Now here on the Choose a Destination page, I need to specify that I want the data to go to a text file. So in this case, I don't want it to go to SQL Server. I want it to go to a flat file destination. And as you can see, the fields here change based on that selection. So I can browse to a location. I'm going to come down here to my C drive and go into Samples. Oops, went to the wrong place. I'll just come back up here, go to Learn Now, okay, and SSIS, and I'm just going to put it right there. And then the name of the file that I want to create there is products.txt. As you can see, I have different options there of text files, CSV files, or all files if I want to use a random format. But a text file is going to work perfectly for this application here. All right, I'll click on Open, and that sets that file name right there. All of the other options are fine, but I want to make sure that this item is checked here. Column names will appear in the first data row. Okay, so this is essentially going to be a comma-separated value kind of a file, and my field names are going to be in the first data row. But you don't have to include those. All right, so I'll click on Next to move on. Now I need to define how I want to get the data, where I want the data to come from, because I'm getting it from a relational database. The option that I'm going to use is I'm going to copy data from one or more tables or views. And as it says, you can use this option to copy all the data from the existing tables or views in the source database. Or if I wanted to write a query to specify the data transfer, I could use this option right there. And this is real handy if I want to write SQL statements that perform joins in order to get data from multiple tables. So you have basically the full power of Transact SQL at your fingertips with that second option. All right, then I'll once again click Next. And I come to the Configure Flat File Destination. So I have to select where I want the data to come from. And in this case, I'm going to use the production.product. And then I can specify what kind of delimiters that I want. Standard is carriage return line feed, so I'll leave that. And then I can also specify the column delimiter. And once again, the comma option is just fine for this. But I can use various other options as well. And if I can use this drop-down list, you can see there's various options there, and then different things for the column delimiter. All right, notice that there's a preview button here, so I'll go ahead and click on that, and that lets me take a look at what the data is going to look like. I can inspect the SQL query that the wizard created for me because I said I wanted all of the rows from that particular table, and then I can get a preview of some of the data. So I can scroll around and see, yep, that looks like the kind of data I need, or go back and decide, well, I also need to bring in some data from a related table, or whatever it is that I need to do. All right, so that gives you a preview into what I'm going to get. The other option here is this Edit Mappings button. So as you can see, this opens up the Column Mappings dialog box. Here you can inspect the column mappings for the package, how each column in the source data is going to map to each column in the destination data. And in particular, one of the things that you can do is you can come down here and change what the destination column name is going to be. So I can select the name item there, or I can ignore it if I don't want the name field to be output to the flat file destination text file. Or I can change the name entirely. Now, it's important to understand that if I was moving this data or copying this data from one relational table to another relational table, I would have had different things to do earlier in the wizard in order to define that. But this list of destination columns would be the columns that already exist in that existing destination table. And I can move them around and so forth, but not change the names as such. I can also look at the type of data that's available and specify whether it's nullable and so forth. So you have some flexibility in how that output data is going to be structured. All right, so in this case, don't want to make any changes. I'm going to accept all that, so I'll just cancel out of that. And I'll click on Next to go to the next page. So this brings up the Save and Run Package page. I want to make sure that Run Immediately is checked because I'm going to run this as soon as the wizard is done, it's going to run the package for me. But I'm also going to save that package. And as you can see, I have options to save it within SQL Server or within the file system. I want to save it within the file system in this case. And then notice that there's a package protection level option here. A lot of times, an integration services package can contain sensitive information. The most common, for example, is that if you have to specify a username and password for the destination SQL Server, if it's going to an instance of SQL Server. So by default, it's going to encrypt sensitive data with the user key, but I'm going to change that to Do Not Save Sensitive Data. Now, there is no sensitive data. I didn't have to enter any username or password. I'm accessing the source data using my Windows authentication. So it's pretty simple. There's not going to be any sensitive data. But with the options that allow you to specify passwords, these fields would become enabled as well. Okay, so I'll go on to Next. And now it's time to name the package because I'm saving it. If I didn't make the selection to save the package, I wouldn't have gotten this step. All right, so this is going to be called Products. And then I can give it some sort of meaningful name or meaningful description. And I'll call this AdventureWorks Products Export. Okay, but you can put in more useful information into that description. And then I also want to put this here in the C drive under Learn Now and SSIS. And I'll leave the default name as products.dtsx and save that, and that creates that path and file name for me. Okay, again, I got these options because the target here is the file system. I would get different options if I were going to save to SQL Server. And I'll click on Next. So here you want to review the actions that the wizard is going to take, in this case, when you click on the Finish button. At this point, if I notice, oh my gosh, I selected the wrong table by mistake, I can just hit the back button and go back and change whatever I need to change. All right, but everything looks fine. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Finish, and it'll start executing the package. And you get this really nice progress dialog box. Now, this went very quickly because, as you can see, there's only 504 rows that were transferred. But this could actually take hours and hours to run, depending on the complexity of the SQL statement that you use to access the data, and of course the number of rows. You have hundreds of millions of rows, this is going to take some time. So in this case, it indicates that it was successful. I have all these green items here and a few information items here. There's no pre-executes commands and all. There's 500 rows transferred. I can click on that. That really doesn't provide me with any useful information. But if anything went wrong, there would be links here where you could get more information about the error that occurred. All right, so at this point, we've created the package, saved it, and executed it. So I'll go ahead and close the wizard. Now I can go over here to Windows Explorer, open that up, and as you can see, we have both the package itself, remember I called it products.dtsx, as well as products.txt. And if I double-click on that, that opens it up by default within Notepad, and you can see all of the data that I exported using this comma-delimited format and put it out in that .txt file. And I can page down, go down here, see all the records, we get pretty close to the bottom there. Come back up, and I can also scroll to the right there. And you can see all of the data. And because I opted to include the column names, those are the first row of that file. So that shows just how easy it is to create a package using the import and export wizard. You just saw one way to run the import and export wizard. In this case, I ran it from the list of programs that's installed by SQL Server within Windows. But there are other ways to launch it. And most commonly, you can launch it within SQL Server Data Tools. In that case, right-click on the SSIS Packages folder in Solution Explorer and select SSIS Import and Export Wizard from the pop-up menu. Or you can select Project and SSIS Import and Export Wizard from the Visual Studio menu. From the Start menu, you can also run the dtswizard.exe in the Run or Start search box, depending on what version of Windows that you're using, from the Windows Start menu, or in the SQL Server 2012 menu. Now, by the way, you're going to see DTS mentioned a lot, even in integration services, which has been around since, I believe, SQL Server 2005. That's the predecessor to integration services, DTS, Data Transformation Services. And a lot of the internal names and program names that Microsoft has continued to use that DTS acronym. So that's what that means. And then you can also start the wizard from within Management Studio. In that case, you just right-click on the name of the database in Object Explorer and then select Tasks Import Data or Tasks Export Data. And then depending on which option you select, that'll cause the wizard to enter the selected database name, the one that you just right-clicked on, in the source or destination page. Launching the wizard from Management Studio or from the command line offers additional choices for saving or executing the package that aren't available when you run the wizard from within SQL Server Data Tools. From Data Tools, the wizard will only create a new package within the open solution.